welcome to another Facebook Live. It must mean it's Friday again, and the weekend is just about here. So I hope everyone has had a good week and has some fun plans for the weekend. I myself have had quite a busy week as kids are starting school, new schools and whatnot, so getting new schedules under our belt and stuff like that. So that's always been a fun thing, and actually a nice topic to talk about another time now that I think about it. But it's not what I want to talk about today. For the weekend, I have hoping to get out to the mountains tomorrow for a hike, and probably my last, not probably, but it's going to be my last kind of decent workout before I race next weekend in Killington, Vermont. So looking forward to this week and tapering and getting all well rested and getting ready for a nice big race next weekend in Killington, Vermont. Then Sunday, my wife is racing in triathlon, so we'll be going. Me and the kids will be going to support her, and of course she's gonna kick ass as always. That'll be fun. And but today's Facebook Live, I want to kind of talk about a topic that I saw come up in a Facebook group I belong to that I think it's probably something that's, well, it is a very controversial topic, and but it's something that people might hear a lot about and hear conflicting information and stories or points of view on the topic. And I just wanted to state kind of my point of view on this topic because I think especially in the ancestral health communities and particularly in the low carb communities, this topic comes up often and sometimes is misrepresented, I think. So this person says, is there something inherently bad about insulin or blood sugar? Or is it only a problem when there becomes too much of it all the time? As someone who has no health problems and seems to handle carbs okay, I'm wondering what would be the rationale for going low carb? Would it be just for the benefits of being fat adapted, or is there something about insulin production that is inherently bad? So this is a topic that comes up often, carbohydrate intake, blood glucose, and insulin, and they're all kind of related. Now I'll start with insulin, and we think, or some people think that insulin is the devil, but in fact insulin is necessary to keep you alive. Your body is going to produce insulin no matter how hard you try to keep it from doing so. And in fact, this is very much a U-shaped curve where if insulin is too low, you're going to have some health issues, and if insulin is too high, you're going to have some health issues. And the same thing goes for blood glucose. If blood glucose is too low, you're going to have problems, and if it's too high, you're going to have problems. And as you might guess, insulin is related to blood glucose and carbohydrate intake. So at the 1,000 million foot level, right, and I'm probably going to bastardize this a little bit, but I'll give you what I recall off the top of my head. How this works is you ingest some type of carbohydrate, maybe that's a potato, some rice, beans, a piece of fruit, let's see, anything else that people like to eat, cheesecake, a cupcake, a cookie, something that has carbohydrates in it. Your body's going to break those carbohydrates down into glucose. That glucose is going to be released into your bloodstream. And the problem, well, not the problem, but if the amount of glucose in your blood gets too high, that can be a deadly situation. So the way the body deals with this is by releasing insulin from your pancreas to take the blood glucose that you don't use in your bloodstream and store it away. And sometimes it will be stored into muscle tissues, or sometimes it'll be stored into fat tissues, but basically it's going to remove it out of your blood so it does not get too high. So this is just perfectly fine. This is the way your body's supposed to work. This is just physiology. That's a very normal thing to happen. So, is um, is having is the fact that your body's producing insulin bad? No, that's saving your life by doing so. Um, Now, as this person alluded to in the question, there's some issues related to blood glucose and insulin, right? So if your blood glucose spikes too high, right, it gets up to like, I forgot the exact number, but maybe say like above 160, which is pretty high or higher, 160, 180, 200, right? When your blood glucose gets up that high for a reason, you start to damage the endothelial lining of your blood vessels, and that is bad, very, very bad thing, right? That's where we start to see plaque that can build up, and the beginning of heart disease and stuff like that. That's just not a good situation. So we don't want our blood glucose to get that high, because that's going to be an issue. And the other issue is if our blood glucose is constantly elevated, right? So we're constantly having the pancreas having to release insulin, because there's so much there's so much glucose in your blood that it always needs to be releasing insulin to deal with that. And that's where we start to see what's called insulin resistance, where there's so much insulin in your bloodstream that your cells start to become resistant to that hormone. And the pancreas has to produce more and more insulin in order to get the glucose out of your bloodstream. And eventually, your cells become so insulin resistant that your pancreas just can't produce enough insulin itself in order to deal with the blood glucose in your bloodstream. And that's when you start to see the beginnings of type 2 diabetes, and people with type 2 diabetes, and then having to inject exogenous insulin into their bodies because their pancreas just can't deal with it themselves, right? So we have two situations where this could be bad, right? We have extreme spikes in blood sugar. All right, we're gonna try this again. I'm having some issues with Facebook Live. It just keeps killing my video. Hopefully this third time is a charm now. Anyways, as I was saying, if your blood glucose goes too high, it spikes really high, that can be bad, or if it's constantly elevated, then that's going to be bad. But the fact of the matter is that your body, when you consume carbohydrates, your body will turn those carbohydrates into glucose, and that glucose will be released into the bloodstream, and your body's going to release insulin to remove that from your bloodstream, because we don't want your blood glucose to get too high. And that's just normal physiology, and that's the way things are supposed to work. So no, eating carbohydrates and raising your blood glucose and releasing insulin is not bad in itself. It's perfectly fine. But like I said, if there are situations where you spike your blood glucose too high, or it's constantly elevated day in, day out, 365 days a year, then that's a problem. So then we go back to the question of eating carbohydrates. Is that bad then? Well, since not, having your blood glucose becoming elevated, not extreme elevation, but somewhat elevated, and insulin being released to deal with that blood glucose is not bad, then eating carbohydrates is not bad, right? As long as you're a metabolically healthy person, and these physiological processes are working the way they should be, you can feel free to eat carbohydrates when you want, right? And the amount is going to be very individualized based on the person, so I can't say that everyone should eat XYZ amount, right? And also, people have different reactions to carbohydrates that will dictate the amount they should eat, right? Some people feel better, they just feel better not eating a lot of carbohydrates. Some people feel better eating more carbohydrates. I think a really interesting experiment in this area that I'm not going to say everyone should do, but a lot of people who are interested in figuring out how they respond to certain carbohydrates and whatnot, is to go look up Rob Wolf's 7-day carb test, where you get a very cheap blood glucose monitor, and you consume, I think it's like 50 grams of different types of carbohydrates, and you see how your blood sugar reacts, right? And basically After the 2 hour mark, if it's below, I think something like 115, that food is probably okay for you. If after the 2 hour mark it's above 115 still, at which point you probably need to investigate further whether that food is okay or not. So people can have very individualized responses to certain things, and if you're concerned about like elevated blood sugar and how you react to certain foods, that's one way to maybe dive deeper into that if you really want to go nerdy about it. And if you happen to be one of those lucky people that has a continuous blood glucose monitor and you can perform these experiments 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that's super awesome. I wish I had that technology on me so I could do that stuff. Maybe someday. But yeah, there's just subjective measures you can use, right? How do you feel after you eat certain carbohydrates? Do you feel tired, sleepy, wired? Do you crash? Does it give you gas or bloating, or how do you feel after you eat things, right? So determining whether a certain amount of carbohydrates or certain types of carbohydrates are good for you is going to be a very individualized and personal preference. But in no way should we demonize carbohydrates or demonize insulin and whatnot, right? And I can attest to the fact that you can eliminate carbohydrates from your diet to the point where insulin is unmeasurable in your bloodstream, which I literally have a blood test back from when I was full-on keto for nearly a year, where I went and had my insulin measured and it was unmeasurable by the lab. And I felt like absolute garbage, and I was probably in the worst health I've ever been. So yeah, driving insulin super low is not a good idea in all cases, turns out. So insulin shouldn't be demonized like it is sometimes. And I know this Facebook Live went way longer than it should have, and maybe is a little bit nerdier than it could have been. But I think it's a very important topic for people to understand when they start to hear different people talking about carbs and blood sugar and insulin and what's right and what's wrong and what's good and what's bad. I just wanted to kind of clear the air because I thought it was a very interesting question that this person asked. So I hope everyone has a good week. Please let me know if you have any questions or comments. Leave them here below. Message me on Facebook, Instagram, whatever. I'm always happy to help out. And I hope everyone has a good weekend, a good week, and I'll talk to you all soon.